A young woman disappeared just 2 days prior to her birthday under enigmatic circumstances. From the outset of the investigation, law enforcement uncovered a series of troubling clues that indicated something grave may have occurred. Despite these concerning signs, the inquiry extended over a decade, and it was not until 12 years later that the startling truth emerged. The revelation incited widespread outrage across the nation, as the public had not anticipated such an outcome. Caitlin Markham was born on August 16, 1989, in Fairfield, Ohio. She was raised in a nurturing environment alongside her parents and younger sister, and she enjoyed a vibrant social life filled with friends. Even in her childhood, Caitlin possessed a remarkable ability to connect with others, effortlessly engaging the shyest children on the playground and bringing joy to their interactions. Additionally, Caitlin was a creative individual with a passion for singing, drawing, and all forms of art, which ultimately influenced her career trajectory. After completing high school, she enrolled in a local university to pursue a degree in graphic design. The summer of 2011 was anticipated to be a pivotal moment in Caitlin's life, as she was preparing for her final exams and planning a significant relocation to Colorado with her fiancé, John. The couple, who had been together for 6 years and became engaged the previous year, envisioned starting their new life in a different city and eagerly anticipated their upcoming marriage. On the morning of August 14, Caitlin was scheduled to work her shift at the bridal shop where she was employed part-time. That day, her loved ones attempted to contact her, but she did not answer any calls or messages. Caitlin's family grew increasingly concerned and reached out to her workplace, only to discover that she had not reported for her shift that morning. This was highly atypical, as Caitlin was known for her consistent communication and had never missed work without prior notification. Initially, her family speculated that she might be preoccupied with other commitments and unable to respond. They opted to wait for further updates. However, as evening drew near without any word from Caitlin, their anxiety escalated to a critical level. Her fiancé, John, decided to visit her apartment after finishing work to ensure everything was all right. Upon arriving, he noticed Caitlin's car parked outside the small apartment complex. He entered the unlocked apartment, only to find her dog alone inside. There were no indications of Caitlin's presence, and everything appeared normal, which only heightened the concern of those who knew her. Consequently, John made the decision to contact the police, informing them that Caitlin had not been in touch since the morning. A patrol officer was dispatched to investigate. After examining Caitlin's apartment, the officer found no evidence of a break-in, struggle, or any signs of criminal activity. However, one detail raised suspicion: Caitlin's keys, wallet, and ID were left behind. This was particularly alarming, as it suggested that if Caitlin had left voluntarily, she would have taken her keys and secured the door. John recounted that he had last seen Caitlin the previous night when they were spending time together at her residence with a mutual friend. John's friend departed for a party with several others, while Caitlin opted to remain at home due to the late hour. A few hours later, John returned to his residence, where he lived with his mother. He and Caitlin exchanged a few messages, but she subsequently ceased her replies. John noted that he typically texted her every morning and received a response, except for this occasion. Investigators interviewed Caitlin's friends and family, but none had been in contact with her since the previous evening. Everyone asserted that it was entirely out of character for Caitlin to leave without informing anyone, especially as she was focused on her final exams and her birthday was approaching, which she intended to celebrate at a local restaurant with her family and friends. Given this information, the police began to suspect that something unfortunate may have occurred to Caitlin and decided to initiate a search operation. They enlisted over 100 volunteers, organized into groups, to scour the city. Her family and friends also created flyers containing information about Caitlin, which were soon distributed throughout the area. Meanwhile, detectives sought any potential leads, starting with an investigation into Caitlin's fiancé, John. On the first day, the police observed minor scratches on his neck, which John attributed to an accidental self-inflicted injury while shaving. They also requested that he undergo a voice stress test, designed to analyze recorded responses for signs of deception. The results were inconclusive, leaving the detectives with lingering doubts. Investigators sought to ascertain whether John was deceitful or merely anxious regarding his fiancée's disappearance. From the outset, he actively participated in the search efforts, responded to all police inquiries, and granted multiple interviews to local news outlets that had begun reporting on the case. The investigators subsequently verified John's alibi, confirming that he was indeed at a gathering with friends that evening. They were also able to substantiate his account of returning home afterward and watching a movie on his laptop by examining the data on his computer. A detective spoke with a mutual friend who had visited Caitlin and John that night, and he corroborated that he was indeed at their residence. He noted that they discussed the couple's impending move, Caitlin's exams, and engaged in casual conversation. However, he observed that Caitlin appeared quieter than usual, spending most of the evening studying on her laptop. He assumed her demeanor was due to stress related to her upcoming exams, which were only weeks away. Given this information, the probability of John's involvement appeared minimal, prompting investigators to redirect their attention to other leads. After obtaining a warrant to track Caitlin's phone, authorities discovered that it had been turned off at 12:06 a.m. with no subsequent activity. They also noted that she had sent John a photo approximately half an hour earlier, which aligned with his account. Despite extensive efforts, no further evidence of Caitlin was uncovered, leading the police to intensify the search in the following days. An increasing number of volunteers joined the effort, and national media began to cover her disappearance, prompting search teams to thoroughly comb the area. Forests, bodies of water, and abandoned structures were thoroughly examined, yet no results emerged. Weeks passed, and despite the relentless search efforts, the police were unable to uncover any trace of Caitlin. John remained deeply engaged in the search, but as time went on, suspicions began to arise among the townspeople regarding his involvement in his fiancée's disappearance. These rumors eventually reached John, prompting him to address the allegations. He expressed his sole desire to bring Caitlin home and emphasized that he could not afford to dwell on such accusations. The investigators clarified that they had no substantial grounds to suspect John, his alibi was verified, he permitted a warrantless search of his home, and he consistently complied with police requests. Nevertheless, John acknowledged that the rumors occasionally frustrated him. On one occasion, while distributing flyers, a woman approached him to discuss the case, expressing the common belief that the boyfriend was likely responsible, unaware that she was speaking to him directly. The search for Caitlin persisted for several months, but ultimately, the investigators had to suspend their efforts. Despite their diligence, they had not uncovered a single clue. Consequently, the police shifted their focus to the investigation, pursuing any new leads. By this time, Caitlin's case had attracted national attention, and detectives received hundreds of tips. Each lead was meticulously investigated, yet none brought them closer to locating the missing young woman. The authorities also continued to increase the reward for information. The information reached a sum of $50,000 within the initial months. However, the case remained unsolved for nearly a year until an unexpected development occurred. Police in Miami apprehended a 28-year-old man for assaulting a college student. Initially, this incident appeared unrelated, but detectives investigating Caitlin's case uncovered that this individual had resided directly across the street from her apartment complex at the time of her disappearance. Detectives traveled to Miami to interrogate him and ascertain his whereabouts on the night Caitlin went missing. After a comprehensive investigation, they determined that he had no opportunity to commit the crime and subsequently ruled him out as a suspect. The case remained stagnant for another year until April 10, 2013. On that day, a man from a small town named Cedar Lake in Indiana was searching for scrap metal along a road adjacent to a wooded area. As he walked past some trees, he noticed a bundle of black tar and decided to investigate. To his horror, he discovered human bones inside. He promptly contacted the police, who sent the remains to a laboratory for analysis. During the search of the area, another bag was found, which contained only a skull. Experts quickly confirmed that the remains were human and identified the victim using dental records. It was Caitlin. This revelation confirmed that Caitlin had been deceased all along, and the police were now certain they were dealing with a murder, as her body had been dismembered and transported to a neighboring state. The perpetrator had not even attempted to bury the remains, which were carelessly left beside a pile of trash. The remains were in an advanced state of decomposition, which hindered forensic experts from uncovering significant clues or determining the precise cause of death. The only notable finding was a stab wound on one of the arm bones. Although the exact cause of death could not be established, medical examiners confirmed that it was unequivocally a homicide. The discovery of the remains in a different state complicated the investigation, necessitating collaboration between the police departments of Indiana and Ohio. Despite their joint efforts, progress was minimal. They did, however, deduce that the body had likely been stored elsewhere before being relocated to the woods, possibly due to the killer's fear of discovery, prompting the decision to move the remains to a more secluded area. In 2015, Caitlin's father opted to hire a private investigator, believing that the local police department was not dedicating sufficient resources to the case. The investigator conducted his own inquiries, engaging with Caitlin's relatives and friends, ultimately identifying two potential suspects. He relayed this information to the police, who chose not to disclose the investigator's findings. That same year, the reward for information was raised to $75,000, yet this did not yield any significant leads in solving the case. Caitlin's father advocated for the transfer of the investigation from the local police to the county authorities, and by the end of 2015, he achieved this goal. A new team of detectives took over the case, essentially starting from the beginning. In 2016, detectives informed reporters that they had identified a prime suspect. Authorities believed they had identified a suspect in the murder, however, they lacked sufficient evidence to proceed with an arrest. Consequently, the suspect's identity remained undisclosed, and the investigation stagnated for several years. In 2018, law enforcement in a nearby town discovered the body of another young woman, and the circumstances surrounding this crime bore a striking resemblance to Caitlin's case, prompting investigators to explore a potential connection. They soon identified a suspect named Michael, who had allegedly stalked the victim for weeks prior to her death. Detectives began to investigate any possible links between Michael and Caitlin, initially finding none. However, they later uncovered a surprising detail. A social media photo from a music festival showed Michael standing next to Caitlin's fiancé, John. When questioned, John confirmed that he had met Michael at the festival but noted that their interaction had been minimal. Despite this intriguing coincidence, investigators were unable to establish any further connection between Michael and Caitlin, preventing them from linking him to her murder. This situation persisted until 2023, when investigators unexpectedly announced the first arrest in Caitlin's case. A man named Jonathan was taken into custody, and authorities informed the media that he was a close friend of both Caitlin and her fiancé. Initially, the police kept the details of the arrest confidential, but 2 months later, they made another shocking announcement: Caitlin's fiancé, John, was arrested on suspicion of her murder. It was only after this that investigators began to disclose additional information. In recent years, significant findings were made public regarding the case that had been transferred to the county police. The new detective assigned to the investigation began anew, meticulously reviewing all available evidence. Almost immediately, they identified John's behavior as suspicious, particularly his 911 call, which the investigators perceived as sounding rehearsed, akin to reciting from a script. This same impression was noted in his initial statements to the responding patrol officer. Subsequently, the detectives examined recordings of conversations with mutual acquaintances of Caitlin and John. Many of these friends had previously expressed troubling observations in 2011. They recounted that in the months leading up to Caitlin's disappearance, she had confided in them about serious problems in her relationship with John, to the extent that she contemplated ending it. Caitlin mentioned that John had begun using drugs, exhibited increased aggression, and was frequently consuming adult content of a disturbing nature. Another intriguing element of the case emerged from witness statements that had been in police records since 2011. On the night of Caitlin's disappearance, 2 teenagers left their homes for a party around 2 a.m. As they passed John's mother's residence, they observed 2 cars approach with their headlights off. John exited one of the vehicles, entered the house, and quickly returned before getting into the driver's seat. Both cars then departed without turning on their lights. These accounts contradicted John's alibi, which asserted that he had been at home watching a movie. Investigators later discovered that his alibi was based on open tabs on his device. John was associated with the film in question, yet there was a lack of definitive evidence to confirm his presence at home while watching it. Consequently, it became apparent that John did not possess a credible alibi. In contrast, 2 witnesses reported seeing him that evening under dubious circumstances. Furthermore, it was discovered that on the night Caitlin vanished, John's phone was turned off just 2 minutes prior to Caitlin's and remained inactive for a duration of 15 hours. Additionally, he deleted several messages sent to his fiancée that evening, leaving their contents unknown. Initially, he asserted that Caitlin had not replied to his good morning message. However, it was later uncovered that he had never sent such a message. Another noteworthy aspect was the neighbors' accounts of hearing disturbances from Caitlin's apartment that night. According to their initial statements, they reported sounds of arguing, banging, and someone softly repeating the word no. John, however, maintained that no argument had occurred between them, and the original investigative team did not find this discrepancy concerning. After evaluating all the gathered information, the detectives determined that John was the primary suspect from the outset, although they required further evidence. They subsequently re-interviewed Caitlin's friends, leading to an unexpected revelation. One female friend disclosed that just a few months after Caitlin's disappearance, John had admitted to having romantic feelings for her. This revelation was particularly shocking, given that John had continued to participate in the search efforts for his missing fiancée and had expressed how much he missed Caitlin. The detectives also. Investigators re-interviewed all witnesses and ultimately secured a search warrant for the residence of John's mother, where he had been residing at the time of the murder. Within the premises, they uncovered a black tarp that was identical to the one that had covered Caitlin's remains, located in his room. Additionally, the police discovered several unsettling poems handwritten by John, one of which contained a disturbing internal monologue: "Deep down I love her, you have to kill her, but I love her, she has to die." The detectives also noted that John had exhibited aggressive behavior towards his new wife. By that time, he had established a family and had children. The police obtained video footage that depicted him yelling at his wife while holding their young daughter. Ultimately, the detectives established that the site where Caitlin's remains were discovered was along the route to John's father's farm, a location he frequented. This detail confirmed his familiarity with the area. After compiling all this information, the detectives confronted John, who denied any involvement in the murder. When they highlighted the suspicious details and inconsistencies, he calmly asserted that they were merely circumstantial. Unfortunately for the investigators, he was correct. They recognized that with the limited evidence available, securing a conviction would be improbable, as there was no concrete proof linking him to the crime. However, they were able to arrest him for providing false statements, based on witness accounts that indicated he had left his house at 2 a.m. There was an additional complication in the case. Witnesses indicated that John was not alone, another vehicle had arrived with him. Following this lead, detectives turned their attention to his friend Jonathan, suspecting he might be the other individual involved. They soon found that Jonathan was also present in a group photograph taken at the music festival, alongside John and a convicted murderer who had previously taken the life of another young woman. Upon reviewing Jonathan's interactions with the police in light of these revelations, the detectives opted to arrest him for providing false statements, although they did not disclose specific details at that time. 2 months later, they apprehended John himself, but the case remained tenuous due to insufficient evidence. The detectives appeared to hope that Jonathan would eventually confess, as they believed someone had assisted the fiancé in disposing of the body, implicating his friend. However, both men continued to deny any involvement in the murder. John managed to secure his release by posting a $1 million bond until the trial. Given the circumstances, investigators took a drastic measure, recognizing that a jury trial would likely result in John's acquittal. They decided to propose a plea deal, wherein the prosecution would reduce the charge to third-degree murder in exchange for a confession. John accepted this offer and, in June 2024, appeared before a judge to plead guilty, though he declined to provide any details of the incident, as it was not mandated by the terms of the agreement. Ultimately, the judge sentenced him to the maximum allowable term for that charge, which in Ohio amounted to only 3 years. This verdict understandably incited outrage across the nation, yet the judge had no alternative. The potential for change existed. Had John declined the plea deal, he could have likely evaded even that sentence, as there was a lack of evidence to support first-degree murder charges. In contrast, all charges against his friend Jonathan were dismissed for similar reasons, as the detectives were unable to uncover any evidence implicating him in the disposal of the body. Following the sentencing, Caitlin's father articulated that his primary concern was not the length of the prison sentence, but rather the uncertainty surrounding the full truth of his daughter's murder. He acknowledged that he initially harbored doubts about John's guilt, but over the years, his perspective had shifted towards believing it. He reminisced about how John had maintained contact with him and even embraced him at Caitlin's funeral, despite being the individual responsible for her death. Shortly after John was incarcerated, his cellmate reached out to the police, alleging that John had disclosed certain details regarding the murder. According to this inmate, an argument had erupted between them that night, leading John to lose control, attack Caitlin, and strangle her. In a state of panic, he contemplated calling the police and even considered staging the scene to suggest that Caitlin had taken her own life, but ultimately opted to dispose of her body instead. However, the detectives were skeptical of this narrative, suspecting that John might have fabricated the story to align with the evidence at hand. The question of whether he was being truthful remained unresolved, as the police theorized that the murder could have been premeditated rather than a spontaneous act of rage. One detective who John was interrogated and became convinced that the individual in question was a psychopath. He remarked that throughout his career, he had engaged with numerous criminals, yet John was particularly notable among them. Despite this conviction, there was no possibility of altering the sentence, and John was scheduled for release in 2027, upon reaching the age of 39. The parents of the victim had resigned themselves to the likelihood of never uncovering the complete truth. Even if John chose to confess, they would probably find it difficult to trust his words. They were left to witness him serving a minimal sentence in prison, after which he would reintegrate into society, posing a potential risk to others. Meanwhile, law enforcement continued to explore a possible link between John, his associate, and the individual convicted of murdering another woman. They did not dismiss the chance that the three might have formed a connection based on their shared violent tendencies and distorted fantasies, although no evidence currently supports this theory. Please share your thoughts on this narrative in the comments section, and if you appreciated the video, kindly press the like button. Thank you for watching.